apologize in advance. I'm gonna apologize in advance. Um, who was that said that was intense? That was not mini selection. That was me. Moving fast. I came in early to test some stuff. And I came in at like before 11:30. And who was already in the waiting room? I think it was like Sophie. Who was in the waiting room already? Tell me in the chat. One of you guys, well, ladies, of course, was in the waiting room. Um, Bella, it was you. It was two of you and then three, like before 11:30. And I love it. I love it. I love it. I love it. I appreciate the timeliness. But what ended up happening is I thought I was gonna go in and be able to test some stuff myself, and these ladies were already sitting there. So here we are. So y'all got an intense motivational video this week, with a couple of weird commercials. And yeah, that's what happened. So full transparency. With that being said, let me throw up our discussion for today. Uh, so we can get right into it. So happy to see everybody in the chat. I had started posting minis here, so I'm going to go back to what I'm supposed to be focused on. I got started in doing all the mini stuff, so and making a mess of it apparently. Like I said, y'all got weird videos with commercials and everything. But here we are. She's here now to save the day. All right. So, with that being said, today's discussion, executing the buyer's brokerage agreement with ease. I have a question in the chat. Who has not yet had executed a buyer's brokerage agreement? Who has not yet presented a buyer's brokerage agreement for execution in the chat? If it's you, say me. Perfect. Perfect, 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 perfect. All right. Vicious. Perfect, perfect, perfect. Now, with that being said, also let me know who has not gone over the buyer's brokerage agreement in a training, kind of like line by line. If there is that anybody has not. Okay, Shantae. Okay, starting new after years. Gotcha, 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 gotcha. You haven't, maybe. Okay. All right. Christy has not. Okay. So this is what I'm gonna do. Um, this particular class does not necessarily go line by line by line, but we are going to go over it in sections. Now, make sure you grab the handout because on the screen you're gonna see my discussion of the buyer's brokerage agreement, but you won't see the full buyer's brokerage agreement on the screen like we do when we do the contracts class. Just because this particular class goes over all of them versus when we do the line by line or section by section review, we focus on just the one exclusive buyer's brokerage agreement. Does that make sense? Is that okay with everybody? So what we're going to do is because this is important that those who have not executed one before, have not gone over one before, we are going to go over at least the first one, the exclusive buyer's brokerage agreement. But I need you guys to make sure you have the handout to review that versus it be on the screen for review. Okay. All right. So with that being said, now that I know where we're going, for those who I have not had an opportunity to meet before, I see, of course, a ton of familiar faces, but I do see some new faces. So I want to formally introduce myself to those of you who are joining us for the first time on Thursday. My name is Ray Cole Jackson. I'm a South Florida real estate attorney. I particularly focus and specialize in transactions, right? And so I am a real estate attorney, licensed title agent, licensed realtor, licensed mortgage loan officer. With that being said, this is why I land in, I train in, I coach in, particularly the transaction piece. You guys can't hear me? It says, can you speak up just a bit? Is it low? Let me know if it's low or if anybody else, is it super low for anyone else? Okay. All right. B, can you turn up your speakers? Maybe, or maybe go out and come back in, or maybe you might have it, if you're on your phone, make sure you don't have it set to phone. Make sure you have it speaker. Perfect. Thanks, guys. Go out, come back in, and then make sure that if you're watching from your phone, make sure you have it on speaker and not coming through your phone. All right? All right. So with that being said, again, my focus, my specialty particularly is in the transaction, right? So from contract to closing is where I focus in. Coming across in Spanish to who? What is going on? Am I in Spanish to anyone else? Somebody said, someone said, do we have a note? Someone said, hola. Does she have Spanish captions? Okay, so guys, you might have Spanish captions on. Man, this is a wonderful day we're having. Many do not laugh. Um, so, with that being said, my entity is Purchase Ready, and so the Purchase Ready group, we focus as a result of my background and experience. We're soup to nuts, full service ecosystem. We provide services to buyers and sellers from lending to real estate and obviously title. Again, you guys understand that that is the spot where I train and where I do business. And so Purchase Ready is that full service ecosystem. With that being said, we've developed Purchase Ready Academy. Purchase Ready Academy is where we train and coach realtors that we work with to also offer to their customers a full service ecosystem, right? Even if you're not licensed, if you decide to become licensed, even if you're not licensed, we teach you the business. We teach you those three different facets and also teach you how to present to your customers, your buyers or sellers, a streamlined process so that it was Spanish captions, so that you can consult your clients with clarity, navigate transactions without chaos, right? I'm having a lot of conversations with a lot of realtors, and for good reason. There's been a lot of changes. There are so many changes right now. And if you're not, if you don't have the skill, right? Some of it, I'll be honest with you, legal. I mean, you're not attorneys. And a lot of these changes, particularly as it relates to the contracts, I will admit, guys, that it requires coaching. It requires coaching because there are some nuances there. There are some gaps there that are not completely filled in. It requires coaching. It requires a close relationship with someone who can help you sort out the chaos and answer questions. And again, I want to tell you guys, it is not for anything that you've done wrong. It's just that as we work through these transactions, we work through these different agreements that have come out, we're finding the gaps. And so when we get on these calls each week, and in the community, for those of you who are already in the Purchase Ready Academy community, what I endeavor to do is kind of just give you guys stuff that comes hot off the press, right? It comes literally from conflict or controversy to you, to the webinar, so that you get this stuff in real time. All right. So with that being said, today's discussion, executing the buyer brokerage agreement with ease. Go ahead and check the chat. If you have not already grabbed the handout, make sure that you grab the handout as we get into today's discussion. All right. All right. So today's objective is to know the Florida buyer brokerage agreement options. You have options, and we're going to look at all of the forms of buyer's brokerage agreements today. And again, like I mentioned earlier when we got started, we're going to look closer at the exclusive buyer's brokerage agreement for those who have not had an opportunity to take a training on that agreement line by line, as well as those who have not had an opportunity to present it for execution to a buyer as yet, right? And then, of course, towards the end, we're going to talk about how to confidently present the buyer's brokerage agreement to a customer. We know that this is now a requirement, right? It is now a requirement. It is not an option. In times past, you had the option as to whether or not you were going to have this conversation. Well, we know now that it is an absolute requirement to get this document executed before you show what? Residential real estate. Okay? So with that being said, this is important because you need to have a clear understanding again, of why this is required, how to explain requirements, and then what you're required to do, right? And you need to understand, because of this document, know that, guys, know that you start from a place of your buyers being financially responsible for your compensation. Okay, so let's start there. When this document is executed, your buyers should understand that they have agreed, they've signed a contract. This is a contract. For all you guys know all about the contract between the buyer and the seller. But now in today's environment, you guys are signing contracts all over the place. Okay? I want to tell you that you're going to be signing, in most scenarios, a minimum of 3 contracts on any transaction. Possibly 2, on average, in most transactions, 3. What are those 3 contracts? Your buyer's brokerage agreement is a contract. It is a contract between you and your buyer. You're going to be signing a compensation agreement, assuming the seller has agreed or the seller's broker has agreed to provide compensation. That's a contract. And then you're going to have your purchase agreement. That is a contract. Now more than ever, you guys are signing contracts all over the place, number 1. And number 2, you're having to know how to enforce those contracts. And that's where we're seeing gaps. That's where I'm definitely seeing gaps, right? So how do we get here? For those of you who were not around about a year ago and say, you know, what some people are saying, in some states definitely, people say, we've always signed buyer's brokerage agreement. Why is this a new thing? Well, it is a new thing. We've always had a buyer's brokerage agreement document that you could have executed with your buyers, but it was not a requirement. It is now an MLS rule that some form of buyer's brokerage agreement, representation, showing agreement is executed with a buyer before you show residential property, right? Now, along with that, we know that in the MLS, the listing is no longer able to display offers of compensation. Not to say that the seller is not offering compensation, but it cannot be listed in the MLS. There can be no information in the MLS that points you to a site that has that compensation. Does that make sense? So you can't have a website on the listing that points an agent to a website that has the compensation listed for all your listings. No. Compensation cannot be in the MLS. All right. Now, this requirement must be executed before properties are shown both in person and virtually. And again, it's for residential, not commercial. Okay. So, what are the forms of buyer's brokerage agreements that you have available to you as templates today, and that we're going to review? You have the transaction broker exclusive buyer's brokerage agreement. You have the single agent exclusive buyer's brokerage agreement. You have the consent to transition to transaction broker exclusive buyer's brokerage agreement, right? Now I'm going to tell you, they all say exclusive buyer's brokerage agreement. They all say that. If you look at your handout, they all at the top say exclusive buyer brokerage agreement. The way I listed them for you guys is to know that there's different forms of exclusive buyer's brokerage agreement. Again, there's a transaction broker. There's a single agent exclusive buyer's brokerage agreement. There is the agreement to transition to transaction broker. So you start off as single agent, but you've already agreed, buyer, that I can transition to transaction broker. You have your no agency exclusive buyer brokerage agreement. Then you have a modification to those exclusive buyer brokerage agreement. You have a showing agreement and a property pre-touring agreement. Who is like, Ray Cole, get out of here. Like, come on. That's 7 agreements. Yeah. It's a new world. There's 7 agreements that you need to have in your arsenal and prepared before you show property to a buyer. Now, again, you don't have to have all 7 executed, but at least some showing agreement needs to be executed, right? There's 6 of those, right? And then you have your modification. All right. So starting with the transaction broker exclusive buyer's brokerage agreement, make sure that you guys grab your handout because, again, remember I told you guys at the beginning, we don't have this. None of these agreements are we going to go, do we have it on the screen to go line by line? So I need you to make sure you pull it up because I am going to review it with you. However, this particular one, section by section, for the benefit of those who have not had the opportunity to take a class, particularly specifically on this document. And I'm going to add a note that we need to do add a class specifically on this one. All right. All right. So the transaction broker exclusive buyer's brokerage agreement. Here's what you need to know about this one. Again, I told you guys it's a contract. This agreement is different from the single agent agreement because it provides limited representation to the buyer. It allows the agent to facilitate the transaction as a neutral. It allows the agent to represent both a buyer and a seller in any one transaction. That's why it's called a transaction broker. All right. So for those of you who have the handout, I hope you guys all do, flip quickly to page 3 of this agreement, and you'll see in paragraph 13, under broker relationship, it says broker will act as a transaction broker. Transaction broker. So that is where the buyer is being made aware, I'm a transaction broker. I can represent both buyer and seller on any particular transaction that I represent you on, right? All right. So with that being said, let's scroll back. You guys are scrolling, I'm flipping because I already have mine printed out. Those of you who've been in training with me before, you know I have all of the documents printed out in a binder. So really quickly going over the transaction buyer brokerage agreement form. The first section is the parties. Who are the parties? Obviously, your consumer is your buyer or your renter. So that's been changed to consumer because this could be also used for rentals. You need to use this even when you're showing rentals. So it's not just for purchases. All right. So consumer, who is your client? Who's your customer? We don't say client, right? The broker, the brokerage, because we know that the relationship is with the brokerage, not the agent, but the brokerage. And so you want to put the brokerage name. The term of the agreement, paragraph 2, how long will this agreement be in effect? Paragraph 3, the property, the type of property. Now you can go as narrowly tailored or as broad as you would like here, right? So you can say, residential property, that's safe. You don't have to say townhouse, condo, single family, just residential property, right? Location, all of Florida, that's possible because maybe you're going to refer them to, another agent. You can refer out, right? Or co-broker transaction. But in most cases, you're going to say, Dade, Broward, Palm Beach, Orlando, Jacksonville, Tallahassee. You can do that. So similarly here where it says location, you can go as broad or as narrow as you and the consumer agrees. Okay. Paragraph 4 and 5, they lay out the obligations of each party. So under broker obligations, very clear. Here's what I'm going to do, buyer. I'm going to represent you with professional knowledge and skill. I'm going to discuss the requirements that you have for locating a property. I'm going to assist you in negotiating a transaction. And then I'm going to cooperate with other licensees, other agents. I see your question, Luther. Go ahead and you guys put your questions in the chat and I'll answer them at the end, okay? Just so we stay on track. I'm going to work with other licensees. potentially as I work with you, right, to find the appropriate property. Subparagraph B, consumer understands that broker may work with other prospective consumers who want to acquire the same property as consumer. I want to point something out here. When we first started going over this agreement, and it is even highlighted more when we go over it in the class that goes line by line. Before we were signing this agreement, guys, I want to highlight to you how many protections you did not have clearly articulated and agreed to when you were just representing a consumer, representing a buyer without having a executed agreement. So as we go through these terms, I want you to think to yourself, if I hadn't had an agreement executed, who's to say they knew that this was their expectation? Who's to say that they knew that this is what the service that I was going to deliver? How did we make clear that they were obligated to compensate me? How do we make clear what their obligations were as it relates to this transaction? These agreements lay it all out, right? Lay it all out. So as we go through these, just think to yourself, that wouldn't have been in writing. That wouldn't have been in writing. That wouldn't have been in writing, right? So let the consumer know, subparagraph B, I could potentially work with other buyers who are interested in the same property, right? If I submit offers for another buyer, a competing offer, if I work with another buyer, say, for example, it's the last property in Florida, it's the last one, last property in Florida. Of course, there are going to be a ton of people that are interested. I hopefully represent the majority of it. With that being said, I'm going to make offers on behalf of all of my customers, consumer. And just so you know, if I make a competing offer, I'll let you know that someone has made a competing offer, but I can't tell you what the terms of their offers are, right? So that's what 4B says, right? You understand, consumer, dropping down to the second to last line. So these agreements are not numbered like our lovely purchase contract. You guys know we can just the purchase contract is line by line numbered. And so here we have to do the old school, second line from the bottom. So second to last line in paragraph 4B, consumer understands that even if broker is compensated by an owner or real estate licensee who is working with the owner, such compensation does not compromise broker's duties to consumer. So it's telling the consumer, hey, someone else might pay me to bring you as a ready, willing, and able buyer, but that does not mean that I work for them. That doesn't compromise my representation and my service to you. It's in black and white. It's in writing. All right. Fair housing 4C, broker adheres. It says that you're going to adhere to the fair housing rules. You cannot agree to do anything at their request that is unlawful. Right. 4D, service providers, broker does not warrant or guarantee products or services provided by any third party who the broker at consumer's request refers or recommends to the consumer. Buyer or consumer. If I recommend to you an inspector, if that inspector does not do the best job, I'm not responsible. I'm just offering a recommendation. You're free to work with them or whomever else you choose. That's what that is saying. It's in writing, in black and white, fully disclosed, and they're going to agree to that. All right. Subparagraph 5 or paragraph 5. Here are your obligations, consumer, and I may say buyer because that's what we're expecting. You're going to conduct all negotiations and efforts to locate a suitable property only through me and refer to me all inquiries of any kind from real estate licensees, property owners, or other source. I'm at paragraph 5A on page 1. This is what makes this agreement exclusive. This is where you get your exclusivity from. Exclusive means you're only working with me to identify and acquire a property. Oh, and by the way, let's read that again. Oh, and by the way, if you become aware of any properties, right, all inquiries of any kind from other agents, other owners, or any other source, you're going to refer them to me. You're going to tell them, I got it. Terry's my agent, so this is great, but I need to go talk to Terry, right? That's what this exclusivity means. That's protection. Before having this executed, what made them exclusive to you? Nothing, right? And this is where we had situations where we would have this conversation about procuring cause. Now, I'm not saying procuring cause is completely gone away, but it is narrowly tailored what we're going to be having conversations about, because every buyer, right, should have a compensation, have a buyer's brokerage agreement executed, and they should only be working with the agent that they've executed that agreement with. So now we're not talking about, well, I showed them and you showed them and he showed them and we showed. Paragraph 5A, great protection, right? All right. 5B, providing broker and necessary third parties information requested by the broker. So if there's anything requested from you, you'll make sure that you get it back over quickly. 5C, being available to meet with broker at reasonable time for consultations and to view properties. That's definitely in the top 5 of provisions in this agreement, right? Being available to meet with me at reasonable time, right? I love the fact that you're gainfully employed. I understand that you work the night shift, and so you kind of do your best work at night, but I don't. I can't show you properties at 9 p.m., 10 p.m. That's kind of unreasonable, right? So it's in there that they're going to work with you at a reasonable time. And so with that being said, the night shift worker can't come say, well, I want to fire Angel because Angel won't show me properties at 10:30 p.m. That's not reasonable. And you agree that you would be available at a reasonable time, right? Indemnifying 5D, indemnifying and holding broker harmless from and against all losses, damages, costs, and expenses of any kind, including attorney's fees and costs, and from liability to any person that broker occurs because of acting on consumer's behalf. If you do something, now, of course, you need to use your agent, use your good judgment. But if you do something at the direction or on behalf of the buyer that creates some type of liability, legal obligation, then this agreement says that they will cover you. I've not yet come across a situation where this provision can be invoked because, again, use your good judgment, right? Be a professional. Paragraph F. Um, 5E is the same as 4C above. Fair housing, no discrimination, not doing anything unlawful. And then finally, 5F, consulting an appropriate professional for legal, tax, environmental engineering, foreign reporting requirements, and other specialized advice. That's what 5F is. I'm the realtor. I'm the real estate agent. If you need tax advice, legal advice, FERPTA, that's the foreign reporting. They're referring to FERPTA. You need that type of advice. You got to go see an attorney for that. Okay, or see the appropriate individual for that. 5G, making a diligent, good faith effort to perform the contract terms of any purchase agreement or contract to lease and close the sale of any property consumer contracts to acquire. That's good. That's saying, hey, you're not going to get to closing and flake. You're not going to get, to a week before closing and say, I don't know about this. Now, of course, there's remedies, but we don't want to have to go that route. We want you to go ahead and close. We want you to do the thing you said you would do, right? Do the thing you said you would do. Make a diligent, good faith effort to perform the contract terms of any purchase agreement or contract to lease, if they're leasing, and close the sale of any property consumer contracts to acquire. Here again, without this agreement, where's this in black and white? That buyer is going to make a good faith effort to do what they agreed to do in acquiring the property. This is a nice little contract, huh? All right. Paragraph 6, retainer. You guys can charge a retainer. Non-refundable retainer. Now, if you are an agent under a broker, you obviously need to speak to your broker and find out how they're going to handle that, because you know that any compensation, it goes to the broker first, right? And so I've had brokers that say, I don't mind if my agents charge that. I'll give them the entire retainer. Perfect. But you want to have a conversation with your broker first to confirm how they will handle that, right? Not necessarily so much that they allow it. I mean, some may have rules, but you're an independent contractor. You're running a business. They should allow it. If they do it, and you just need to know what are the terms that they will allow this to happen. All right. Um, Paragraph 7. This is where we get into the compensation. This is the meat and potatoes of the agreement. Paragraph 7. I'm going to read this first line, and this might make some of you guys jump up out your seat and run like, oh my gosh, Florida Realtors did an amazing job drafting this for us. Paragraph 7, compensation. Broker's compensation is earned when, during the term of this agreement or any renewal or extension, consumer or any person acting for or on behalf of consumer contracts to acquire real property as specified in this agreement or defaults on any contract to acquire property. Do you guys know what that means? Your compensation is earned. If you guys make sure you guys are, you have the handout, because we don't have the full document on the screen. So Dominica, grab the handout, go to the handout, and grab that over. Minnie, we have a Bella saying that it didn't arrive for her. Work with her to see if you can drop it to her directly. If anyone else has not gotten it, message Minnie directly. All right. But for those of you who do have it, flip to page 2. All right. So compensation. Me either on the handouts. Check your spam too, guys. Check your spam. Check your spam. Check your spam. If they walk away from a done deal, you still get paid. That's what it means, Dean. Exactly. Exactly. So I want to make sure this is clear. Now, of course, we have all the different nuances here. But this agreement, guys, you've done your job when they found a property that they would like to purchase and they've gone under contract. That is your job. Your job is to identify a property that the buyer is interested in purchasing and they go under contract. That a renter is interested in leasing and they go under contract. Your job is done. Now, obviously, you're not paid until you close, but understand that your commission has been earned. Right? Your commission has been earned. The handout is, if you hit this link, the handout should come to you. If you have used the link and it hasn't come, check your spam. If not, then we need to, Minnie, I need you to make it a link in the chat for these guys that are not getting it. These guys and gals who are not getting it in their email. All right? All right. As a matter of fact, let me do this really quickly. I'm gonna stop this share, and I'm going to share it on my screen really quickly. I'm gonna share the handout on my screen. Minnie said she's gonna try and download it for you guys. I'm gonna do this really quickly because I don't want you to be lost. One second. Actually, I'm gonna open this for those of you who are still trying to get it. All right. I'm gonna do a quick share screen. It's way different than we planned to do it today, but I want to make sure y'all see this. I'm gonna do a quick share screen. Here, share. All right, can y'all see my screen? Okay, perfect. Thanks, Lucas. All right, so this is the handout that you will get once it gets to your email. And at the end are the agreements. A little smaller. And here we are on page 2. All right. All right. So we're here on the compensation paragraph, paragraph 7. Broker's compensation is earned. There you go. Minnie just dropped it in the chat. Thank you so much, Minnie. Broker's compensation is earned when, during the term of this agreement or any renewal or extension, consumer or any person acting for on behalf of the consumer contracts to acquire real property as specified in this agreement, or defaults on any contract to acquire property. So I want to say that again. We said it before. Your compensation is earned, the compensation that the buyer has agreed to. Now we got a little nuance here. The compensation that the buyer has agreed to pay you is earned when they go under contract. Now, let's say, for example, you have a compensation agreement executed with a seller. Well, their money is not earned until you close, right? But as it relates to this agreement, your compensation is earned when that buyer goes under contract, right? This compensation is for broker services to the consumer. Compensation received by broker, if any, from an owner or owner's broker for services rendered to consumer will reduce any amount owed by consumer per this paragraph. All right, what does that mean? That means, say, for example, there is an agreement to compensate you at a rate of 3%. This agreement is to compensate you at a rate of 3%, right here in subparagraph A. The buyer says, okay, I'll compensate you at 3%. Perfect. I can see you guys can see my mouth. Let's say, for example, your buyer goes under contract and that to purchase a property where the seller is offering compensation of 2.5%. That 2.5% is going to offset your 3%, leaving you with a balance of 0.5% that you can pursue to collect or you can waive, right? This is not this and that. Your compensation is limited to what you've agreed to in this agreement. Similarly, if you agree to compensation of 2%, but seller is offering 3%, what needs to happen? We need to modify. We need to get a modification going so that you can get that additional 1% to be compensated for a total of 3%. Are we clear? We're clear. I know, guys, a lot of nuances, but that's why we're here. A lot of nuances. You can only be compensated up to what you agreed to in this agreement. I'll say it again. Perfect. So, compensation agreement is executed. I'm going to do both scenarios. Compensation agreement is executed. Buyer's brokerage agreement is executed. You and buyer agree to 3% compensation. Buyer's interested in the property. That seller is only offering 2% compensation. That 2%, the 3% that the buyer agreed to pay you is going to be offset by that 2%, leaving 1%. You have the right, by virtue of this contract, to either enforce that the buyer needs to bring that additional 1% to closing, because this is an additional closing cost to them if it is not offset by compensation or some type of seller concession by the seller. You have the right to either enforce that additional 1% or you waive it. Are you clear on that? Everybody's clear on that. If you're not clear on that, say no in the chat. Good. Thank you, Lucas. Here's the opposite of that. You've agreed to 2%. Hot dog, you guys have identified a property where the seller is agreed to 3%. You cannot collect 3% in commission. You can collect 2% unless you get a modification of this compensation agreement executed, which that's in your handout, your package as well. Does that make sense, guys? You can only collect up to what is agreed to in this brokerage agreement. All right, perfect. Thank you. So here's some options here. You can either do a flat fee, you can do a percentage, right? One or the other, or you can do a flat fee or percentage plus you always put 3%. That's fine. Plus if you have a transaction fee, that needs to be in there. You can put NA Luther, yes. Very good. Yep. Any blanks. You know that's one of my standards. Don't leave no blanks unnecessarily, right? So if it's a purchase, is it a flat fee or percentage? Or is it a flat fee or percentage plus what you guys call a transaction fee, or what is called a transaction fee or administrative fee, or whatever the fee is, right? This is where that fee goes. It needs to be in there, guys, because if you go to closing, for example, and you drop in $4.99 on your intake form, and the buyer says, "What is this $4.99?" And you say, "Oh, that's my transaction fee." Who's paying it? You. Says who? I never agreed to this. And that was always the case. That was always the case, that adding in a transaction fee without being in writing was not enforceable. Really, was not enforceable. All right. All right. So paragraph B is where we get into the terms. If your customer is leasing a property, it's the same information: flat fee or percentage, or flat fee or percentage plus a fee. Option: if your consumer contracts for the option to purchase, what will you be compensated? That's there. And then other, if there's any other form of acquisition that is not discussed up here, then you're going to treat it as a purchase or exchange. The subparagraph D says you're going to just bump it up here. So if there's any other potential acquisition type that's not covered as B or C, then we're going to treat it as A. All right. And then in the additional fees section, do you charge any additional fees? Do you charge a fee? Do you use a Sprinter and you want to charge them for gas? I don't know. Water bottles, like literally, what is the additional fees you're charging this consumer? They will be listed here. All right. All right, well, we gotta move. You guys have change the whole content, but this is good. Protection period. Consumer will compensate broker if within how many days after termination date the consumer, I keep saying buyer because I'm used to it. The consumer attracts to acquire property which you brought to their attention, right? So say, for example, you do a 6-month representation agreement. In that 6 month, buyer just didn't find anything. You show them 60 properties. They did not find anything they liked. Oh, just so happened 2 days after, the very first property you showed them, now they're interested in it. No. We're not playing that game. This is your protection period. How long do you want to, he says entitled, how long do you want to be protected past your initial contract period? 90 days, 120 days, that's up to you guys, right? If left blank, it's going to be 30 days, right? And so this is saying any property that, even if you didn't show them the property, if they saw the property while they were under contract with you, they never brought it to your attention because they knew they were going to try and go after the property after this agreement ended, you're still entitled to that compensation. Now, someone will say, well, how do I know? Stranger things have happened. We'll cross that bridge when we get to it. But just know that you're protected. I'd rather have the protection. I'd rather have the protection and not need it than to need the protection and not have it, right? Show property. What do you mean show property, Roberta?
You said that you will collect when you show property. Well, is that physically showing it or giving them a listing and going through the property details?
Where you mean when I said that you showed them just
Yeah.
now, but it brought to their attention. If they became aware of it during your representation agreement. But then I'm gonna tell you something is why you don't even have to be concerned about that. This paragraph is very broad. This says, I'm gonna read it again. Consumer contracts to acquire any property which was called to their attention by the broker, by you, or any other person, or found by them. This is a very broad paragraph. Either I showed it to you, Minnie showed it to you, Angel, Anne Marie, or you saw it yourself. If it was during the time period that I represented you, I'm entitled to compensation. It's a very broad. This agreement is very decent. But I want to make sure I say sometimes because there is a problem here. There is a gap. There is a loophole here. And we got 14 minutes. I want to make sure we get to it. So with that being said, I'm going to give you guys a heads up. The other 6 documents, we're not going to get to very much here because we kind of went on another way. But this is important that you know this. So I'm going to finish this, and then I'm gonna literally jump to what you need to know about this agreement that is where you're not protected. All right, so stay with me. Conditional termination, paragraph 9. At consumer's request, broker may agree to conditionally terminate this agreement. If broker agrees to conditional termination of this agreement, consumer must enter a written agreement to this effect and pay a cancellation fee of what? So this is saying if we say, you know what, the agreement was for 6 months, but 60 days in, ma'am, I've shown you 60 properties in 60 days. I'm exhausted, right? I drive a Tesla and I know I only need to charge the car, not buy gas, but this is a lot. So we're going to agree to go our separate ways. But I do need you to reimburse me for my charging expenses, $500. You sign the agreement and you go your separate ways. But again, broker may avoid the conditional termination and consumer will pay the fee, stating the compensation if from the time that y'all terminated this early and the protection period, so up here, if you did 90, 100, or 6 months past the date, consumer contracts to acquire any property which, prior to the early termination date, was found by the consumer or called to the consumer's attention by a broker or any other person. Here we are again, guys. Look at this protection. This is saying we were contracted to be in a relationship for 6 months. We got tired of each other at 60 days. But within those 60 days, I showed you 60 properties. After we agreed to early terminate this agreement, you went under contract for the very first property I showed you. Not only am I entitled to, I'm entitled to full compensation, as Dean says, entitled. That's what paragraph 9 says. You got to pay me. You got to pay me. Because I did my job. I showed you the property that you like. Whatever reason you didn't go into contract, who knows? But this is protection. Terry says, what if they don't tell you that they signed an agreement? I mentioned earlier, you cross that bridge when you get to it. Stranger things have happened. I've had agents find out that a buyer went under contract for a property. The various ways, I don't remember. To be perfectly honest with you, if I had to sit and tell you how you would know, I'm sure I can figure out a way because I can backdoor anything. But again, for the purposes of this provision, you just know that you're protected, right? Dispute resolution. This agreement is construed under Florida law. Any claims or controversies arising out of this agreement will first be attempted by mediation, arbitration, and then if not, then litigation, right? You can here at the middle of the paragraph agree to arbitration only, meaning you're going to go to a neutral third party, not go to court, to hash out any disputes concerning this agreement. That's what this section is saying. Here again, oh, sorry, I'm going to skip paragraph 11. Assignment. Broker may assign this agreement to another broker. This assignment will bind and annul to brokers and consumers, heirs, personal representatives, successors, and assigned. This means if you move to another brokerage, you can assign this agreement to the other brokerage. You go from Real to EXP to KW to location to LPT, right? This thing can move around, assuming the broker allows it to be released. Additionally, let's say, for example, the buyer, let's say, for example, your buyer is an entity that's sold. It's a company that's sold. Well, whoever purchased the company is also bound to you by virtue of this agreement. All right. Brokerage relationship, again, this is where we made clear that this is a transaction broker. Broker will act as a transaction broker. And then this is where they sign. This is where they sign. Again, highlighting in paragraph 14, brokerage commissions are not set by law, are fully negotiable. Broker may not receive compensation from any source that exceeds from any source. I saw something in here about new construction that exceeds the amount or rate agreed to with consumer. Again, you can modify this agreement, but without modification, you can only be paid what you've agreed to in this agreement. All right. Now, in the last 8 minutes, I'm going to move quickly. I want to show you guys something. Do not get lost here. But I want you to know something. And this is a slide, but since we're on the document, we're going to discuss the document. This is the one gap here in this representation agreement. That gap is dispute resolution. We know that you have earned your compensation. You've earned the right to be paid when the buyer goes under contract. We also know that customarily, you're going to be paid what? At closing on the settlement statement, right? In the transaction. I told you guys last time that with the seller compensation agreements, you needed a way to bind the transaction to your compensation. So to basically ensure it's contingent, to block this transaction cannot close without me being paid. What happens in a situation where the buyer says, you know what? Oof. I know we agreed to purchase that property that the seller was not offering any compensation. And we used the concessions for to buy down my rate. And we said that I would pay you at closing. I actually don't have that money. So I'm going to close and I'll get back to you. What are you guys thinking? Can that happen? In the chat, can that happen? Can that happen? In the chat, can that happen? Why not? Tell me why not. Tell me why not. It can happen. It can happen. Let me tell you why it can happen. Yeah, Misty, yeah. You have an agreement, but what's your remedy under this agreement? Your remedy under this agreement is to go to mediation. And if mediation doesn't resolve it, then you go to arbitration if you agree to, or litigation. And guess when that happens? When you get to it. Is that clear? You understand what I'm saying to you right now? So, with that being said, what I want you to take away from today's discussion, what I suggest to you, and this is in our slide, I gotta show you this slide. I'm gonna stop sharing and go back to the presentation. And again, we went a little quick, but I hope that you found value and you understand why we changed our discussion, and you still find value, because this is what's important. You can know all of these agreements, but if you don't know that you have no way of requiring is not part of the funds to wait, I'm sorry, I'm trying to find the slideshow. Here it is. And it's not funny. This is very serious, guys. This is a serious situation. And you guys know I'm very I try to be very what do I call it? I can't disclose, but I can tell you guys that in the past 60 days, the team has had not less than 3 transactions where this issue has come up concerning agent compensation, and the agent not being properly protected to enforce payment at closing. So with that being said, with me just now dropping that bombshell on you about having that buyer's brokerage agreement alone executed will not protect you and not enforce payment at closing, I'm going to recommend to you, not require, but I'm going to recommend to you that you always negotiate for seller compensation, or it can be concessions, but make sure that it be identified in the contract, that in the purchase contract, that you're being compensated. Because with that, now the transaction is contingent on you being paid. You can't close. The closing team cannot fund this transaction without making sure that that line item is there at closing. Does that make sense? Now, I taught you guys how to make sure that the compensation from the seller is documented. I taught you guys that. I taught you that you're going to make sure you have the compensation agreement executed. You're going to make sure that, and then you're going to also make sure that you have rider GG or additional terms language that says that the transaction is contingent upon agent being compensated and whatever your compensation is. Are we clear on that? Or you said makes a lot of sense. Guys, I know that made some of you probably like, Ray Cole, what are you talking about? Good. I'm glad y'all understand. Here's what you got to understand. Nadine said, I think I get it. Perfect. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to recap just to make sure, because this is super important. The buyer's brokerage agreement ensures that you comply with MLS rules, that you show a property, that you have the agreement executed before showing. It also has the buyer agreeing that you be compensated. The gap is you don't have a way to ensure that you're paid at closing without some other mechanism. That mechanism is the seller compensation agreement. I'm going to tell you guys, or I'm going to say this, but just because I have to be thorough as an attorney, but I'm not going to give you the language as yet, just because that has not been hashed out. Of course, you can put any additional term section. I'm not going to tell you what it is that we've been discussing, but there could potentially be language added to the additional term section of the buyer's brokerage agreement. I'll say that much. But outside of that, using what you have available to you is the seller compensation agreement and rider GG. You're going to make sure you get a compensation agreement executed, and then you're going to make sure that your compensation, you being paid, is a contingency in the transaction. All right. All right, guys, I am like, we went way in another direction. But it's something that you all needed to know. All right. So with that being said, wrap up. I said a whole lot and now I'm saying wrap up. Print and organize your brokerage agreement forms. Print and organize your brokerage agreement forms, all 7 of them. She said, "Are we, Jerry? Are we being served lunch? You're gonna be eating lunch. We're gonna have some raffles for lunch. Practice presenting the terms of each agreement. You want to role play some objection handlers. So let's get into questions. So really quickly, for those of you, we have a couple changes. One, the replay of this training is on YouTube. It's on YouTube. Go to our YouTube channel. The link isn't here. Minnie, do you have it? If not, we're going to make sure we email it. If not, you'll get a follow-up email. The replays are going to be on the YouTube channel. Oh, there it is. She has in the chat. Thank you, Minnie. We need to make sure we add the hyperlink on the slide. Follow us on IG. The last thing I want to ask for you guys, for those of you who are already in the community, congratulations, you got lucky. That is now a paid community. Anyone who joins that community, that is now a paid community. For those of you who are already in, do not somehow lose your key, because if not, you will have to pay to come back in. That community, as of this past Monday, is a paid community because of the dynamics of what we're talking about now. That community will now have access to me during the week to provide all of this support that you being trained on Thursdays. That community is now a done with you community. Done with you community. So whereas on Thursdays I bring you guys the information, many still need help with implementation. So that community is now a done with you implementation community. There is now a schedule for office hours. There will be more checklists and handouts in that community, so that for myself as a professional, I want to make sure that there is an avenue for Florida agents to get the support that they need. Because again, you guys can only navigate and decipher through so much, right? You didn't go to law school. You didn't sign up for this, right? You didn't sign up to be an attorney. You didn't sign up for it. So I will be your attorney. That's what the academy is now. But again, for that reason, it is now a paid community. We have to put more time and energy into that community for those who are in it. All right. Last thing, I would appreciate if you guys can leave us a 5-star review. Purchase Ready as an entity and as a training, everything is based on education. We do business with our buyers and our sellers based on education. We do business with realtors based on education. And so if you found value in today's training, I would greatly appreciate if you guys can go to our brand new Google page, Google review page, and leave us a 5-star review. I would greatly, greatly appreciate that. All right. So for those of you that want to hang back, we are a little bit over time, but I'll go ahead and answer questions. Now. And again, I know we went over time, but this is important. All right, so I'm gonna go up to the top and answer these questions. All right, so I'm just gonna roll down. Residential property includes residential income, meaning if they're purchasing it as an investment property, yes, I get what you're saying, yes. So if they're purchasing a residential property, they're gonna use it as an investment property, yes. Good question, Luther. Is this required for rentals? Not other agents. So Terry, if you're asking me, this agreement, yes, it's required even if you're showing rental properties. Whether the engagement is to rent or purchase, you must have a representation agreement executed. All right. Yep. Walk away from them deals to get paid. Missy says yes, 50%. As an agent, do you need your broker's approval to waive? Jocelyn, yeah, you do need your broker's approval. Jocelyn's question, as an agent, do you need your broker's approval to waive the additional fee? Well, let me say this, speak to your broker, because that's your brokerage's business model. Some brokerages, if you don't charge the fee, they'll charge you. So they'll deduct it from your compensation. So the appropriate answer is ask your broker. Very good question. What would you do in the case of a bonus for new construction? Vanya, very good question. I would, again, you want to use the modification. You're going to use the modification, or if you know that your buyer is interested in new construction properties, you can include in the additional term section language around the fact that should the buyer choose to or acquire, goes under contract to purchase a property wherein the seller is offering additional compensation above and beyond that which is agreed to. And here, such as bonuses, the buyer agrees to execute a modification agreement to allow the broker to be compensated, something along those lines. And we can clean that language up and drop it in the community. I hope you're in the community, Vanya. You should be busy. You've done these trainings before. 2 questions. I'm doing a lot of open houses to build database. Very good job. They are not my listings. Which documents should I have on hand for visitors to sign in? Very good question. So if you're managing an open house, it is not necessary for you to have a buyer's brokerage agreement executed when you're manning the open house, right? It is not necessary for you to have it executed. However, if you're doing an open house and the buyer says, well, Shantae, what about that house across the street? Any other property, you need to have a buyer's brokerage agreement executed with that buyer. Okay. Now, outside of that, you should be collecting contact information because that's a different trade, right? We're talking about building up your buyer's database. So you should be collecting their contact information so that you can build up your database separately. As it relates to this discussion today, you do not have to have a buyer's brokerage agreement executed to show them around an open house that you're manning. What is a reasonable date range for? That's a good question. I would say reasonable is a year. I know that most of you do not intend to have to work with a buyer for a year, but you kind of just never know. For any number of reasons, that transaction could potentially not close as soon as you thought it would. So it doesn't hurt to have a year, right? Oh, very good point, Dean. Dean says some seller agents think they're entitled to see the buyer's brokerage agreement. That is in my notes. You are not required to share this agreement with anyone. Do not send your buyer's brokerage agreement to the listing agent. Do not send it to the closing team. Do not send it to the mortgage broker. No one needs to see that. That's an agreement between you and your buyer or your renter. Your brokerage probably wants it for compliance reasons, but do not share that with other individuals. It's not a requirement and you shouldn't share it, right? That's confidential between you and the buyer. So thanks so much for bringing that up. Yes, thanks. Would staging fees go there also? Well, Gigi, staging, I would assume is going to go, you're staging a listing. So that's the listing agreement. This is for buyers. We did show property. Conditional, I thought the consumer could cancel this without the broker's approval. Nope. They got this is a contract. It's a contract. You can agree to, they can say they don't want to work with you anymore, and that's fine, but I'm still protected for the term of the agreement. You can quote unquote ghost me or however you want to call it, but I'm protected, right? And you guys, and if you have someone that doesn't want to work with you anymore, cancel it. That's fine, cancel it. You might have a cancellation provision similar to the listing agreement. You're still going to be protected for the work that you did, right? So I personally wouldn't fight with that. For the protection period, I would say at least 90 days. At least 90 days. At least. What if they don't tell you that they signed an agreement? And you can't control that. I would hope that, well, I won't say I would hope, but because I know that many buyers, unfortunately, they're going to sign these agreements and not even know what they're signing. So with that being said, you guys, again, you got an obligation to make sure they understand this is an agreement, this is a contract that I'm going to be compensated at this amount. Now, part of that dialogue is at your direction, I can ensure that only properties wherein the seller is agreeing to pay my commission or give you credits toward closing to cover the cost of my commission. At your direction, I can do that, right? But know that I need to be paid, and as this agreement says that I'm being paid by you. Misty says search their name on iMap to see if they come up. Is it brokerage have the agent? So that's a good point. So Vanya said she feels like this agreement is only as good as if the brokers decides to support the agent. I agree. I will tell you that recently the closing team, we have a transaction where buyer's brokerage agreement was for 3%. The seller was paying a little bit less than that. And for whatever reason, buyer's agent was, in the customer's terms, harassing them for the difference. To the point where the consumer was literally in tears, calling the office in tears, frantic. There's a lot that goes on behind the closing table that you guys do not know. We are counselors. You guys think you're counselors. And so consumer calls, frantic, in tears, saying they're having heart palpitations because the agent is harassing them for the difference of this compensation. So that being said, did have to get the broker involved. And the broker did agree that the balance of that agreed upon compensation amount would be waived, that it was not necessary to enforce it. And so to your point, Vanya, yes, there may be situations where the broker says, I know they agreed to 3. This is how much the seller is willing to pay. Let's be okay with that. Maybe in that situation, I don't know. I mean, I'm not going to put a broker in any precarious position, but maybe in that situation, the broker also says, well, and because of that, if there's a split, they'll give you a small reduction on the split. But at the same time, just know that that's your agreement, right? To be paid 3% or 4%. And so if that is what you agree to, then as the front line of that agreement, you have to make sure that you get the documentation that's necessary to enforce it, so that it doesn't come to a situation where a broker has to say, hey, let's just cut our losses on this one. Does that make sense? So that's why you guys attend these classes, and you're made aware of how to document the situation. I have a seller, our agent just putting commission agreement for this agent now, not for the buyers like before. Okay, let me read this again, Shantae. Just putting commission agreement for this agent. Shantae, if you want to come off mute, because I'm not clear on that question.
Is it the last question?
Yes, it says, I have a seller, our agents just putting commission in the agreement.
Oh, yeah. So because it's like, it sounds like poker, no one's showing their hand.
Right.
So if I'm representing a listing agent, protecting that person or, advocating for the seller, should I put a commission for the buyer if I don't know if they already have an agreement for 2%, 3%, or whatever it might be? Because nobody is saying.
Are you saying put it in the contract or put it in the listing agreement?
In the listing agreement.
Yeah, you definitely want to have a conversation. Yes. But just because it's in there does not mean that it has to be offered per se to the seller. You got to have that conversation. Right. Because you know that without that, you're going to be hard pressed to go on to get your property on the contract. So with that being said, you definitely want to have a conversation about compensation. You want your customer's agreement to the amount, so that when you are asked about compensation, you can confidently say, yes, they are offering compensation. Now, to your point about people, keeping their cards to their chest, you might have situations where a listing agent says, yes, they're offering compensation, make me an offer and tell me what you're looking for, and we'll let you know whether or not they agree. And they might do that. Now, they might do that. They could also say, yes, they're offering, 2%, or they're offering 3%. They may just be outright and say what it is. Does that answer your question? The agreement. If going through your completion have to come from Luther. Are you still here? I need clarity on that one. Going through your conversation will come from your team or title company president. Compensation will come at closing through the title company. Isn't it better to get the seller to sign? Isn't it better to get the seller to sign a seller's broker to buyer's broker, or keep it off the contract? So Jerry, yes and no. Yes to your first answer. Yes to your first question. No to the second part of your question. You want the compensation agreement executed because that's your contract between either the seller and the buyer's agent, or the listing agency and the buyer's agency. So you do want that executed. No to the second part, because you always want compensation tied into the contract so that there is a contingency for closing. Meaning, you want it tied to the contract so that you being paid or enforcing payment cannot be bypassed at closing. That's what this is all about. You need it tied to the transaction, to the contract, so that it cannot be bypassed at closing. And the way we make it not bypass that closing is we make sure that there is language that makes the closing contingent on it, becomes one of the terms of the transaction. Got it. Good. Right. So I think that's the best way. That's the best way to say it. You, in both scenarios, guys, this is the point of kind of why we went over today. I want you guys to always understand, particularly as a buyer's agent, have I documented this transaction well enough so that my compensation is not bypassed at closing? Yes, I have a remedy. Yes, I can go to mediation. Yes, I can, sue. Yes, we have arbitration, but that's after closing. That's after everyone's been paid. How do I make sure that my compensation is not bypassed at closing? And one of the only ways you can do that is to make sure that it's part of the purchase contract. And so what we've been talking about is how to make it part of the purchase contract. All right. All right. Oh, we are going so long. If I have GG signed, GG or FF or both, not both. Not both. So F is credit. So if they're giving a credit, right? So like if they're saying, oh, giving $10,000 credit, that's FF. GG is, and you can use that credit towards your closing costs, which the closing cost includes the buyer's compensation. Versus GG is saying, we are going to sign a specific compensation agreement. Now, I've had agents say, well, what if I already have the compensation agreement signed? Do I still need GG? Because GG says that a compensation agreement will be signed. I will tell you yes, because the fact that it's already been signed does not negate what is in GG, the language that's in there, which says this contract is contingent upon. That's what I keep telling you guys. You're looking for a language that says contingent. Contingent means this must happen, right? So the reason why you still want to use GG, even if a compensation agreement has already been executed, is because it has the language that makes the contract. It binds, it ties in your compensation to the contract so that your compensation can what? Not be bypassed. All right. All right. Is there any other question that I have not? How do I know if I'm in the community? If you will know is when you click on the link to the community, you can go in. It's in school. We use the school app. If you're already in it, great. Stay in it. Again, don't lose your key like crypto. Don't lose your wallet. How do I know I'm in the community? So there it is there, school. Builders have been asking for them, Paris. No.
Yes, hi, Nicole. Thank you so much for the classes and all of the information. But yes, I've been doing a lot of new construction, and that is the requests they're asking for the buyer's
I think
broker
it's for the same
agreement.
reason that they don't know. And I would say why? That's the agreement between my buyer, me and my buyer. Why do you need this compensation agreement? Unless you sign an agreement, say for example, that says, let's say for example, you sign it, and I'm just making something up. You sign a compensation agreement with the builder that says that you need to share your compensation agreement with them. Outside of that, there is no grounds for them to require you to show that compensation agreement.
That's good to know.
All right. Once we have email after open house and start sending still properly, first do we need to? Shantae, good question. She says once we have their email and we start sending them properties, do we need an agreement before we go out? Yes, you always need an agreement before you go out. 100%. You cannot show properties. You can send them listings, but you can't grab your phone and say, hey, FaceTime, see that? Look at this beautiful bathroom. No, you're showing. You're showing property at that point. And that requires a buyer's brokerage agreement. All right. If sellers are not offering compensation, that's no reason to not submit a bid. That's correct. That's correct. Just because sellers are not offering compensation does not mean you should make an offer, because within that offer should include a request for compensation. You just never know. Right now, we're in a very strong buyer's market, and sellers want to move their properties. And so whereas they may not have been considering it when they first went on the market and they were not aware that it is a real thing, now, time to change, right? Terry, yep, I think we answered that already. Am I familiar with NACA? Yes. GG is Anne-Marie should be in your Form Simplicity for sure has it with Florida Realtors. If not, your brokerage probably has a bank of templates, and so it'll be there. All right, Vanya, you're last up. Go ahead with your question. Good to see you.
Good to be here again. Thank you for the information. I have question. I'm not sure if you're familiar with NACA buyers, where NACA require them not to pay any fee outside what the seller is paying. So how do you, even when they sign that agreement, how would you advise us to go about that if we're not being compensated by the seller?
Well, you still have to, hold on, not being compensated by the seller?
Yeah.
Where are you getting your compensation from?
So I have two NACA buyers now. From their handout, and they even send a couple emails again to the buyers to make sure they understand that they don't have to pay buyer agent, that the seller needs to pay the buyer agent. But we know what's going on now. It's an option. The seller might pay me my full fee or some of the fee. So in that case, and they already signed my buyer agreement from the get-go. So I do.
So a couple things here I'm thinking. Number one, if they've already signed your buyer's brokerage agreement, they've agreed to pay. I'm gonna say that If NACA is telling them not to pay, then I'm going to assume that NACA also has some written agreement, just like Paris was asking. Have you signed an agreement with NACA to say that you will not require that the buyer pay you in the event that the seller's not paying you?
No, they asked to upload the agreement, the buyer signed, the buyer agreement. They
Okay.
have that from the beginning.
Exactly. So with that being said, if you're not being paid by the buyer and the buyer has, say for example, they're interested in a property where the seller's not compensating, how are you supposed to be paid?
Yeah. I have the conversation with the buyer, obviously, consultation. They okay with that. But however, if this is not gonna be included in like the closing fee or is not being collected by the title company at closing, I'm not sure.
So here's what you have to do. You have to speak to NACA and say what I asked them, exactly what I just asked you.
Okay.
If you're advising buyers to, so first of all, I have a contract. So you say I have a buyer's brokerage agreement. I have a contract where they've agreed to pay me. Number two, if you're advising them not to pay me, how do you anticipate me being paid if by chance I would have to modify my agreement, because this is an option. I would have to modify my agreement for the buyer to be aware that I'm only showing them properties where the seller is agreeing to compensate me. You know what I mean? Something along those lines. Because otherwise you're not working for free.
Yeah, yeah.
So I would get clarity on that. It's one thing to say what they should be advising the buyers is to say, make sure that you instruct your agent to only present or negotiate offers, negotiate contracts where the seller is going to compensate the agent. That's the language. Make sure in the agreement, because if you're gonna, and this goes back into the slides that we kind of jumped over, you're gonna have buyers that say, well, wait a minute. They will completely understand that they are obligated to pay the 3%. And if they say, well, wait a minute, I want to work with you, but I don't have 3%. You're going to have buyers where you're going to have to say to them, well, we have an opportunity for you to direct me, and we can place in the agreement that we will only negotiate, we will only go under contract, negotiate and go under contract for properties wherein the seller is agreeing to either pay my compensation or offer concessions to cover my compensation. That can be part of your agreement. And again, might not be many, but you will have at least some buyers that understand when they sign this compensation agreement, they now entered into a contract to pay you. That unless some funds come from somewhere else, that's going to be an additional closing cost to them. Everybody clear on that?
Okay.
Is what unethical, Barbara?
Thank you.
Good question. To only show them properties where the seller will agree to compensate, Barbara, is that the question? And you guys can feel free to use a mic.
Yes, correct. That's what I was referring to.
Not unethical, no. Especially if you're disclosing it, because you're working at the direction of your client. Your client has said, Barbara, okay, I understand that you need to be paid. And I understand that you're worth every penny of that 3%, but I don't have 3% to bring to closing as a closing cost. So I know that there's this attorney that said that you can ensure that you only guide me to go under contract wherein the seller has agreed to cover the cost of your compensation. Can you agree to that? And you say, yeah, I can agree to that. And we can put that in the agreement. The buyer has asked you to protect their pockets. Because without it, that 3% is coming from them. They're walking out uncovered. Does that make sense? It would be unethical, I would say, to not explain to them. That's the biggest thing I want to make sure that, like I said, the lady was in tears. He's telling me I signed a contract. Ma'am, you did. Ma'am, you did. You did sign a contract.
I think it's the best thing is to convey your value. And then they know why they're paying you, I guess. Yeah. That would be the better route that I'd take, but
Well, that's part of the conversation. That is
yeah,
part of the conversation. That's one of the slides that we jumped over to have this discussion. So that's definitely part of the conversation. But even, I'm going to use as an example, and I'm just using it as an example just for hypothetical purposes. We all know the value of a Maserati all day long, but sorry, Maserati, I'm not buying you. Right? I don't have it. Right? So with that being said, it's not that your buyer won't know the value of your representation, but can they afford to pay you? It comes down to that. And if they can't afford to pay you, then the value of your representation just increase if you know how to go out and, as Jerry said, negotiate for your compensation to be covered. Because make no mistake, this was a conversation, talking about NACA, this was a conversation that that I had to do a talk with a non-for-profit when this first came out, and they said, well, wait a minute, these folks already can barely afford the standard closing costs, the closing costs that they already had, and now you're going to add on to that 2-3% of the purchase price. Where are they going to get this from? How are they going to get representation? Now you made a barrier to representation if they are now responsible for paying for their representation when before their representation was paid for by the sellers. Does that make sense? So this was already a discussion. Now we've gotten past that, and agents are trained on how to address that. And the way they address that is by letting the buyers know, I know how to have a conversation to negotiate for this cost to be a seller's closing cost and not yours. It has to come from the sellers. That's where the equity is. There you go. Now there's some buyers. I have a file in the office. The buyer is paying the buyer's compensation, the buyer agent compensation. So again, this is not anything where this is just never going to happen. So let's be clear. We're not going to do a pie in the sky situation. The team has a file right now where buyer's compensation is on the buyer side. The seller did not agree, won't agree. They went under contract. Now, what happens there? You probably, in that case, and I can say for sure because I'm familiar with this transaction, you probably priced it. The purchase price was adjusted accordingly. Purchase price was adjusted accordingly, so that compensation was pretty much deducted from what they offered as a purchase price. So they didn't pay purchase price plus compensation is an option. All right. All right, guys, we are well past our time. This is a very great conversation. Listen, have a great 4th of July weekend. You guys kind of stew on this. We're going to have to do a part 2 and a part 3, seems like, on this discussion. Next week is seller compensation agreements. I know for sure we will not go this far because those agreements are not long at all. Next week, we'll just have more conversation to make sure that you guys understand how to tie these agreements down. Again, so that your compensation is not, what did we say, Jerry? Bypassed. Buyers agents do not get bypassed at the closing table. Do not get bypassed at the closing table. Have a great weekend. Thanks, Liberta.
Thank you so much.
Not a problem. You like my hair, Jerry? Like I need to put some product on it. Thank you.
Thank you.
See y'all later.